Nalanda was an acclaimed Mahavihara, a large Buddhist monastery in the ancient kingdom of Magadha in India. The site is located about 95 kilometres southeast of Patna near the town of Bihar Sharif, and was a centre of learning from the 5th century CE to c. 1200 CE. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The highly formalized methods of Vedic learning helped inspire the establishment of large teaching institutions such as Taxila, Nalanda, and Vikramashila, which are often characterized as India's early universities. Nalanda flourished under the patronage of the Gupta Empire in the 5th and 6th centuries and later under Harsha, the emperor of Kanayu. The liberal cultural traditions inherited from the Gupta age resulted in a period of growth and prosperity until the 9th century. The subsequent centuries were a time of gradual decline, a period during which the tantric developments of Buddhism became most pronounced in eastern India under the Pala Empire. At its peak, the school attracted scholars and students from near and far, with some traveling all the way from Tibet, China, Korea, and Central Asia. Archaeological evidence also notes contact with the Shailendra dynasty of Indonesia, one of whose kings built a monastery in the complex. Much of our knowledge of Nalanda comes from the writings of pilgrim monks from East Asia such as Xuanzang and Yijing, who traveled to the Mahavihara. In the 7th century, Vincent Smith remarked that a detailed history of Nalanda would be a history of Mahayanist Buddhism. Many of the names listed by Xuanzang in his travelogue as products of Nalanda are the names of those who developed the philosophy of Mahayana. All students at Nalanda studied Mahayana as well as the texts of the 18 sects of Buddhism. The curriculum also included other subjects such as the Vedas, logic, Sanskrit grammar, medicine and Samkhya. Nalanda was very likely ransacked and destroyed by an army of the Muslim Mamluk dynasty under Bakhtiyar Khilji in c. 1200 CE, while some sources note that the Mahavihara continued to function in a makeshift fashion for a while longer. It was eventually abandoned and forgotten until the 19th century, when the site was surveyed and preliminary excavations were conducted by the Archaeological Survey of India. Systematic excavations commenced in 1915, which unearthed 11 monasteries and 6 brick temples neatly arranged on grounds 12 hectares in area. A trove of sculptures, coins, seals, and inscriptions have also been discovered in the ruins, many of which are on display in the Nalanda Archaeological Museum situated nearby. Nalanda is now a notable tourist destination and a part of the Buddhist tourism circuit. Etymology. A number of theories exist about the etymology of the name Nalanda. According to the Tang dynasty Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang, it comes from Nara Lambda, meaning no end in gifts, a charity without intermission. Yijing, another Chinese traveler, however, derives it from Nagananda, referring to the name of a snake in the local Tang. Hiranon Sastri, an archaeologist who headed the excavation of the ruins, attributes the name to the abundance of nalas in the area and believes that Nalanda would then represent the giver of lotus stalks. Early history. Nalanda was initially a prosperous village by a major trade route that ran through the nearby city of Rajagriha, which was then the capital of Magadha. It is said that the giant Tirthankara Mahavihara spent 14 rainy seasons at Nalanda. Gautama Buddha too is said to have delivered lectures in a nearby mango grove named Pavrika, and one of his 2 chief disciples, Shariputra, was born in the area and later attained nirvana there. This traditional association with Mahavihara and Buddha tenuously dates the existence of the village to at least the 5th-6th century BCE. Not much is known of Nalanda in the centuries hence. Taranatha, the 17th-century Tibetan Lama, states that the 3rd century BCE Mauryan and Buddhist emperor Ashoka built a great temple at Nalanda at the site site of Shariputra's Chaitya. He also places 3rd century CE luminaries such as the Mahayana philosopher Nagarjuna and his disciple Aryadeva at Nalanda, with the former also heading the institution. Taranatha also mentions a contemporary of Nagarjuna named Suvishnu building 108 temples at the location. While this could imply that there was a flourishing center for Buddhism at Nalanda before the 3rd century, no archaeological evidence has been unearthed to support the assertion. When Faxian, an early Chinese Buddhist pilgrim to India, visited Nalo, the site of Shariputra's parinirvana, at the turn of the 5th century CE, all he found worth mentioning was a stupa. Nalanda in the Gupta era. Nalanda's datable history begins under the Gupta Empire, and a seal identifies a monarch named Chakraditya as its founder. Both Shanzang and a Korean pilgrim named Prajnavarman attribute the foundation of a Sangharama at the site to him. Chakraditya is identified with the 5th century CE Gupta Emperor Kumaragupta I, whose coin has been discovered at Nalanda. His successors Buddhagupta, Tathagatagupta, Baladitya, and Vajra later extended and expanded the institution by building additional monasteries and temples. The Guptas were traditionally a Brahmanical dynasty. Narasimhagupta, however, was brought up under the influence of the Mahayanist philosopher Vasubandhu. He built a Sangharama at Nalanda and also a 300 feet high vihara with a Buddha statue within which, according to Shanzang, resembled the great vihara built under the Bodhi tree. The Chinese monk also noted that Baladitya's son, Vajra, who commissioned a Sangharama as well, possessed a heart firm in faith. The post-Gupta era. The post-Gupta period saw a long succession of kings who continued building at Nalanda, using all the skill of the sculptor. At some point, a king of central India built a high wall along with a gate around the now numerous edifices in the complex. Another monarch named Purnavarman, who is described as the last of the race of Ashoka Raja, erected an 80 feet high copper image of Buddha to cover which he also constructed a pavilion of 6 stages. However, after the decline of the Guptas, the most notable patron of the Mahavihara was Harsha, the 7th century emperor of Kanayu. Harsha was a converted Buddhist and considered himself a servant of the monks of Nalanda. He built a monastery of brass within the Mahavihara and remitted to it the revenues of 100 villages. He also directed 200 households in these villages to supply the institution's monks with requisite amounts of rice, butter, and milk on a daily basis. Around 1,000 monks from Nalanda were present at Harsha's royal congregation at Kanayu. Much of what is known of Nalanda prior to the 8th century is based on the travelogues of the Chinese monks Shanzang and Yijing. Shanzang in Nalanda. Shanzang traveled around India between the years of 630 and 643 CE, and visited Nalanda first in 637 and then again in 642, spending a total of around 2 years at the monastery. He was warmly welcomed in Nalanda, where he received the Indian name of Mokshadeva and studied under the guidance of Shilabhadra, the venerable head of the institution at the time. He believed that the aim of his arduous overland journey to India had been achieved, as in Shilabhadra he had at last found an incomparable teacher to instruct him in Yogacara, a school of thought that had then only partially been transmitted to China. Besides Buddhist studies, the monk also attended courses in grammar, logic, and Sanskrit, and later also lectured at the Mahavihara. In the detailed account of his stay at Nalanda, the pilgrim describes the view out of the window of his quarters thus: "Moreover, the whole establishment is surrounded by a brick wall, which includes encloses the entire convent from without. One gate opens into the Great College, from which are separated 8 other halls standing in the middle. The richly adorned towers, and the fairy-like turrets, like pointed hilltops, are congregated together. The observatories seem to be lost in the vapors, and the upper rooms tower above the clouds. Xuanzang was a contemporary and an esteemed guest of Harsha and catalogued the emperor's munificence in some detail. According to Xuanzang's biographer Hwui Li, Nalanda was held in contempt by some Stavaras for its emphasis on Mahayana philosophy. They reportedly chided King Harsha for patronizing Nalanda during one of his visits to Odisha, mocking the sky-flower philosophy taught there and suggesting that he might as well patronize a Kapalika temple. When this occurred, Harsha notified the Chancellor of Nalanda, who sent the monks Sagaramati, Prajnarashmi, Simharashmi, and Xuanzang to refute the views of the monks from Odisha. Xuanzang returned to China with 657 Buddhist texts and 150 relics carried by 20 horses in 520 cases, and translated 74 of the texts himself. In the 30 years following his return, no fewer than 11 travelers from China and Korea are known to have visited famed Nalanda. Yijing in Nalanda, inspired by the journeys of Faxian and Xuanzang, the pilgrim Yijing, after studying Sanskrit in Srivijaya, arrived in India in 673 CE. He stayed there for 14 years, 10 of which he spent at the Nalanda Mahavihara. When he returned to China in 695, he had with him 400 Sanskrit texts which were subsequently translated. Unlike his predecessor Xuanzang, who also describes the geography and culture of 7th century India, Yijing's account primarily concentrates on the practice of Buddhism in the land of its origin and detailed descriptions of the customs, rules, and regulations of the monks at the monastery. In his chronicle, Yijing notes that revenues from 200 villages had been assigned toward the maintenance of Nalanda. He described there being 8 halls with as many as 300 apartments. According to him, daily life at Nalanda included a series of rites that were followed by all. Each morning, a bell was rung signaling the bathing hour, which led to hundreds of thousands of monks proceeding from the viharas towards a number of great pools of water in and around the campus, where all of them took the bath. This was followed by another gong which signaled the ritual ablution of the image of the Buddha. The Chaitya Vandana was conducted in the evenings, which included a 3-part service, the chanting of a prescribed set of hymns, shlokas, and selections from scriptures. While it was usually performed at a central location, Yijing states that the sheer number of residents at Nalanda made large daily assemblies difficult. This resulted in an adapted ritual which involved a priest, accompanied by lay servants and children carrying incense and flowers, traveling from one hall to the next chanting the service. The ritual was completed by twilight. Nalanda in the Pala era. The Palas established themselves in northeastern India in the 8th century and reigned until the 12th century. Although they were a Buddhist dynasty, Buddhism in the time was a mixture of the Mahayana practiced in Nalanda and Vajrayana, a Tantra-influenced version of Mahayanist philosophy. Nalanda was a cultural legacy from the great age of the Guptas, and it was prized and cherished. The Palas were prolific builders, and the rule oversaw the establishment of 4 other Mahaviharas modeled on the Nalanda Mahavihara at Jagadala, Odantapura, Somapura, and Vikramashila respectively. Remarkably, Odantapura was founded by Gopala, the progenitor of the royal line, only 6 miles away from Nalanda. Inscriptions at Nalanda suggest that Gopala's son, Dharmapala, who founded the Mahavihara at Vikramashila, also appears to have been a benefactor of the ancient monastery in some form. It is, however, Dharmapala's son, the 9th century century emperor and founder of the Mahavihara at Somapura, Dvarpala, who appears to have been Nalanda's most distinguished patron in this age. A number of metallic figures containing references to Dvarpala have been found in its ruins, as well as two notable inscriptions. The first, a copper plate inscription unearthed at Nalanda, details an endowment by the Shailendra king, Balaputradeva of Suvarnadvipa. This Srivijayan king, attracted by the manifold excellences of Nalanda, had built a monastery there and had requested Dvarpala to grant the revenue of 5 villages for its upkeep, a request which was granted. The Gosrawan inscription is the other inscription from Dvarpala's time, and it mentions that he received and patronized a learned Vedic scholar named Varadeva, who was later elected the head of Nalanda. The now 5 different seats of Buddhist learning in eastern India formed a state-supervised network, and it was common for great scholars to move easily from position to position among them. Each establishment had its own official seal with a Dharma chakra flanked by a deer on either side, a motif referring to Buddha's deer park sermon at Sunnit. Below this device was the name of the institution, which in Nalanda's case read Nalanda Mahavihara Bhiksu Samgasya, which translates to of the community of venerable monks of the great monastery at Nalanda. While there is ample epigraphic and literary evidence to show that the Palas continued to patronize Nalanda liberally, the Mahavihara was less singularly outstanding during this period, as the other Pala establishments must have drawn away a number of learned monks from Nalanda. The Vajrayana influence on Buddhism grew strong under the Palas, and this appears to have also had an effect on Nalanda. What had once been a center of liberal scholarship with a Mahayanist focus grew more fixated with tantric doctrines and magic rites. Taranatha's 17th-century history claims that Nalanda might have even been under the control of the head of the Vikramashila Mahavihara at some point. The Mahavihara, while its excavated ruins today only occupy an area of around 1,600 feet by 800 feet, or roughly 12 hectares, Nalanda Mahavihara occupied a far greater area in medieval times. It was considered an architectural masterpiece, and was marked by a lofty wall and 1 gate. Nalanda had 8 separate compounds and 10 temples, along with many other meditation halls and classrooms. On the grounds were lakes and parks. Nalanda was a residential school, i.e., it had dormitories for students. In its heyday, it is claimed to have accommodated over 10,000 students and 2,000 teachers. Chinese pilgrims estimated the number of students to have been between 3,000 and 5,000. The subjects taught at Nalanda covered every field of learning, and it attracted pupils and scholars from Korea, Japan, China, Tibet, Indonesia, Persia, and Turkey. Xuanzang left detailed accounts of the school in the 7th century. He described how the regularly laid out towers, forest of pavilions, armikas and temples seemed to soar above the mists in the sky, so that from the cells the monks might witness the birth of the winds and clouds. The pilgrim states, an azure pool winds around the monasteries, adorned with the full-blown cups of the blue lotus. The dazzling red flowers of the lovely Kanaka hang here and there, and outside groves of mango trees offer the inhabitants the dense and protective shade. Library. It is evident from the large numbers of texts that Yejing carried back with him after his 10-year residence at Nalanda, that the Mahavihara must have featured a well-equipped library. Traditional Tibetan sources mention the existence of a great library at Nalanda named Dharmaganja, which comprised 3 large multi-story buildings: the Ratnasagara, the Ratnodadi, and the Ratnaranhaka. Ratnodadi was 9 stories high and housed the most sacred manuscripts, including the Prajna Paramita Sutra and the Gaya Samaha. The exact number of volumes in the Nalanda library is not known. but it is estimated to have been in the hundreds of thousands. The library not only collected religious manuscripts but also had texts on such subjects as grammar, logic, literature, astrology, astronomy, and medicine. The Nalanda library must have had a classification scheme which was possibly based on a text classification scheme developed by the Sanskrit linguist Panini. Buddhist texts were most likely divided into three classes based on the Tripitaka's three main divisions: the Vinaya Sutra and the Abhidhamma curriculum. In his biography of Xuanzang, Hwui Li states that all the students of Nalanda studied the Great Vehicle as well as the works of the 18 sects of Buddhism. In addition to these, they studied other subjects such as the Vedas, Heta Vidya, Shabda Vidya, Chikitsa Vidya, the works on magic, and Samkhya. Xuanzang himself studied a number of these subjects at Nalanda under Shilabhadra and others. Besides theology and philosophy, frequent debates and discussions necessitated competence in logic. A student at the Mahavihara had to be well versed in the systems of logic associated with all the different schools of thought of the time, as he was expected to defend Buddhist systems against the others. Other subjects believed to have been taught at Nalanda include law, astronomy, and city planning. Tibetan tradition holds that there were 4 doxographies which were taught at Nalanda: Sarvastivada Vaibhashika, Sarvastivada Sotrantika, Madhyamaka, the Mahayana philosophy of Nagarjuna, Chittamatra, the Mahayana philosophy of Asanga, and Vasubandhu. In the 7th century, Xuanzang recorded the number of teachers at Nalanda as being around 1510. Of these, approximately 1,000 were able to explain 20 collections of sutras and shastras, 500 were able to explain 30 collections, and only 10 teachers were able to explain 50 collections. Xuanzang was among the few who were able to explain 50 collections or more. At this time, only the abbot Shilabhadra had studied all the major collections of sutras and shastras at Nalanda. Administration. The Chinese monk Yijing read that matters of discussion and administration at Nalanda would require assembly and consensus on decisions by all those at the assembly, as well as resident monks. If the monks had some business, they would assemble to discuss the matter. Then they ordered the officer Viharpal to circulate and report the matter to the resident monks one by one with folded hands. With the objection of a single monk, it would not pass. There was no use of beating or thumping to announce his case. In case a monk did something without consent of all the residents, he would be forced to leave the monastery. If there was a difference of opinion on a certain issue, they would give reason to convince. No force or coercion was used to convince. Xuanzang also noted, the lives of all these virtuous men were naturally governed by habits of the most solemn and strictest kind. Thus, in the 700 years of the monastery's existence, no man has ever contravened the rules of the discipline. The king showers it with the signs of his respect and veneration and has assigned the revenue from 100 cities to pay for the maintenance of the religious influence on Buddhism. A vast amount of what came to comprise Tibetan Buddhism, both its Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions, stems from the teachers and traditions at Nalanda. Chantarakshita, who pioneered the propagation of Buddhism in Tibet in the 8th century, was a scholar of Nalanda. He was invited by the Tibetan king, Khrisrondu San, and established the monastery at Samai, serving as its first abbot. He and his disciple Karmalashila essentially taught Tibetans Hadada philosophy. Padmasambhava, who was also invited from Nalanda Mahavihara by the king in 747 CE, is credited as a founder of Tibetan Buddhism. The scholar Dharmakirti, one of the Buddhist founders of Indian philosophical logic, as well as one of the primary theorists of Buddhist atomism, taught at Nalanda. Other forms of Buddhism, such as the Mahayana Buddhism, followed in Vietnam, China, Korea and Japan. flourished within the walls of the ancient school. A number of scholars have associated some Mahayana texts such as the Shurangama Sutra, an important sutra in East Asian Buddhism, with the Buddhist tradition at Nalanda. Ron Epstein also notes that the general doctrinal position of the sutra does indeed correspond to what is known about the Buddhist teachings at Nalanda toward the end of the Gupta period when it was translated. Historical figures associated with Nalanda. Traditional sources state that Nalanda was visited by both Mahavihara and the Buddha in c. 6th and 5th century BCE. It is also the place of birth and nirvana of Shariputra, one of the famous disciples of Buddha. Aryabhata, Aryadeva, student of Nagarjuna, Atisha, Mahayana and Vajrayana scholar. Chandrakirti, student of Nagarjuna. Dharmakirti, logician. Dharmapala, Dignaga, founder of Buddhist logic. Nagarjuna, formalizer of the concept of shunyata. Naropa, student of Tilopa and teacher of Mapa. Shilabhadra, the teacher of Shanzang. Shanzang, Chinese Buddhist traveler. Yijing, Chinese Buddhist traveler.